From the book, Understanding the Dismissive Avoidant Attachment Style by Mindy Rivers, Why Emotions Feel Unsafe to a Dismissive Avoidant. This section is about why emotions can feel unsafe to a dismissive avoidant person, even when the people around them are kind. This is one of the most confusing parts of dismissive avoidance. From the outside, emotions can look like simple honesty. A partner cries, shares fear, or asks for reassurance, and they are just trying to be close. For a dismissive avoidant person, that same moment can feel like pressure, exposure, or the beginning of a problem they cannot solve. The goal here is to explain that experience with respect, because when you understand why emotions feel unsafe, you can begin to make them safer. Emotions feel unsafe when they were not met safely early in life. Many dismissive avoidant adults did not grow up in homes where feelings were welcomed and soothed. They may have grown up in homes where feelings were ignored, minimized, mocked, or treated as inconvenient. If you learned that sadness led to dismissal, sadness would begin to feel like a dead end. If you learned that fear led to criticism, fear would begin to feel like something to hide. If you learned that anger led to conflict that never repaired, anger would begin to feel dangerous. Over time, the safest option becomes controlling what you show, because showing feels risky. This does not mean a dismissive avoidant person has no emotions. Often they have deep emotions. The issue is that emotions became linked to discomfort. Instead of emotions feeling like a pathway to closeness, emotions can feel like a pathway to shame or overwhelm. When something feels like that, you naturally try to avoid it. Avoiding emotion can become as automatic as pulling your hand away from a hot stove. One common situation looks like this. A child is upset and reaches for comfort, and the caregiver responds with impatience or dismissal. The caregiver might say the child is being dramatic. The caregiver might tell the child to stop crying. The caregiver might respond with silence. The child learns that emotion changes the relationship in a painful way. The child may still feel the emotion, but they learn to hide it. That hiding becomes a habit, and habits become identity over time. The adult later says they are not very emotional, when what they often mean is that they learned not to show emotion. Emotions also feel unsafe when they feel like a loss of control. Many dismissive avoidant adults value control because control has been their way of staying steady. If you grew up in a home where emotional moments led to chaos, conflict, or shame, you might have learned to protect yourself by staying composed. You might have learned that the best way to stay safe is to stay rational. In adulthood, intense emotions can feel like the opposite of rational. They can feel like a force that could pull you under. So you distance yourself from them, either by shutting down, by focusing on logic, or by leaving the room. This often shows up when a partner is emotional. The dismissive avoidant person may feel their chest tighten. They might feel the urge to escape. They might feel irritated, not because they do not care, but because irritation creates distance, and distance restores control. Partners can interpret this irritation as coldness, and the avoidant person can interpret the partner's emotions as pressure. In reality, both are reacting to their own histories. The partner is trying to connect. The avoidant person is trying to stay safe. Emotions can also feel unsafe because they can trigger the fear of being judged. Many dismissive avoidant adults grew up in environments where emotions were met with criticism. If you cried, you were told you were too sensitive. If you expressed fear, you were told you were weak. If you expressed need, you were told you were demanding. Over time, you may have learned to associate emotion with humiliation. As an adult, showing emotion can feel like opening yourself up to the same kind of judgment, even if your partner has never judged you that way. Your body may still brace as if judgment is coming. This is why dismissive avoidants often prefer to process alone. Alone time allows feelings to exist without being witnessed. Witnessing can feel like evaluation. If your past taught you that people respond poorly to your feelings, then being seen while feeling can feel dangerous. You may not even want comfort. You may simply want privacy. That desire is not wrong. The difficulty arises when privacy becomes isolation, and when isolation becomes the only way you can tolerate your own emotions. Another reason emotions feel unsafe is that emotions can be linked to obligation. Many dismissive avoidant adults learned early that relationships come with expectations they cannot meet. If a caregiver relied on the child emotionally, or if the child sensed that their needs burdened the caregiver, the child may have learned that emotions create demands. In adulthood, a partner's emotions can feel like a request that the avoidant person is responsible for fixing. Even if the partner is not asking for a fix, the avoidant person may feel the responsibility anyway. That responsibility can feel heavy, and heaviness can feel like a trap. So the avoidant person pulls away to protect themselves. One common situation looks like this in a couple. One person says they feel lonely and wants to talk. The dismissive avoidant person hears a task, a demand, or a potential accusation. They may feel their stomach drop. They may feel the urge to defend themselves. They may think, I am going to be blamed. They may also think, I am going to be expected to provide something I cannot provide. That thought can create panic, and panic often shows up as withdrawal. The partner experiences the withdrawal as abandonment. The avoidant person experiences the conversation as danger. Both experiences are painful, and both can be understood in attachment terms. Emotions can feel unsafe because they can awaken longing. This is a quiet truth many dismissive avoidants do not talk about. If you have spent years avoiding emotional need, allowing yourself to feel it can be frightening. It can feel like opening a door you will not be able to close. Longing can feel endless. It can feel like you will become dependent and lose your strength. So you keep longing at a distance. You tell yourself you do not need much. You focus on independence. The cost is that the heart does not disappear. It simply becomes harder to access. This often shows up after intimacy. A dismissive avoidant person might have a deeply tender moment with a partner and feel warmth and closeness. Then, later, they might feel unsettled. The closeness woke up a part of them that wants more, and wanting more can feel unsafe. The avoidant person might then create distance to quiet the longing. They may tell themselves the relationship is too intense or too demanding. They may focus on their partner's flaws. These moves reduce longing by reducing closeness, but they also reduce connection. Emotions can also feel unsafe when you do not have practice with them. If you grew up in a home where feelings were not named, you may not know what you are feeling until it is very strong. You may miss the early signals. Then, when the emotion finally breaks through, it feels sudden and overwhelming. This makes emotions seem unpredictable. Predictability is comforting. Unpredictability feels dangerous. So the avoidant person tries to keep emotions away, because emotions feel like a storm that arrives without warning. Healing begins when you start to see that the danger is not always in the emotion itself. The danger is often in the meaning you learn to attach to it. Sadness may have meant rejection. Fear may have meant humiliation. Need may have meant burden. If those meanings were learned, they can be unlearned. This does not happen by forcing yourself to be emotional. It happens by having new experiences where emotion is met with respect. It happens by allowing small feelings to be named and tolerated, so they do not have to build into a storm. One common situation looks like this in growth. A dismissive, avoidant person notices irritation rising in a conversation and realizes irritation is often their shield. They pause and say they are feeling overwhelmed. They ask for a short break and promise to return. This is emotional honesty, but it is manageable. It does not require a dramatic confession. It simply names what is true and creates safety. Over time, moments like this teach the avoidant person that emotion can be shared without losing control or dignity. Emotions feel unsafe to a dismissive avoidant because emotions were often not safe in the early environment, and because emotions now can activate old fears of shame, obligation, and loss of control. Understanding this can bring compassion to your own reactions and to the reactions of someone you love. It can also show you a path forward. The path is not to become a different person. The path is to make emotions safer through steady experiences of respect, privacy that does not become disappearance, and honesty that does not become overwhelm. When emotions become safer, closeness becomes less threatening, and love becomes easier to stay present for. The fear of vulnerability. This section is about the fear of vulnerability, and why it can be so strong for someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style. Vulnerability is the act of letting someone see what matters to you, especially the parts you cannot control. It is admitting you are hurt, admitting you miss someone, admitting you are afraid, or admitting you need comfort. For many people, vulnerability is hard but still possible. For a dismissive, avoidant person, vulnerability can feel like stepping into danger even when love is present. Understanding that fear is one of the most important steps toward changing avoidant patterns, because the fear often sits underneath withdrawal, defensiveness, and emotional distance. Vulnerability becomes frightening when it was not met with care earlier in life. If you showed need as a child and it was ignored, you learned that vulnerability leads to emptiness. If you showed need and it was criticized, you learned that vulnerability leads to shame. If you showed need and it made adults irritated, you learned that vulnerability burdens people. These lessons do not disappear when you become an adult. They often become the quiet background belief that being open will cost you something. The fear of vulnerability also comes from the desire to maintain dignity. Many dismissive avoidant people carry a deep respect for strength. They may have built their life around being capable. They may have learned to handle pain privately, and they may feel proud of that. Vulnerability can feel like the opposite of that identity. It can feel like admitting weakness. Even if they want closeness, the fear of vulnerability can make closeness feel like a risk to self-respect. When a person feels that risk, they often choose distance, because distance protects dignity. One common situation looks like this. A dismissive avoidant person feels hurt by something their partner did, but instead of sharing the hurt, they become distant. They might act cold. They might focus on the partner's flaws. They might convince themselves the relationship is not worth it. Underneath, they may be trying to avoid the vulnerability of saying, "That mattered to me." Saying it mattered reveals that the partner has power to hurt them. Many dismissive avoidant people fear that kind of power imbalance. They want to feel safe by feeling in control. And vulnerability can feel like giving up control. Vulnerability can also feel unsafe because it invites dependency. To admit you need someone is to admit you are attached. Attachment is a beautiful thing, but for dismissive avoidant people, attachment can be linked to fear. They may associate attachment with being trapped, obligated, or overwhelmed. They may have learned early that relationships require them to shrink themselves, perform, or manage other people's moods. When you have that history, dependency does not feel comforting. It feels dangerous. Vulnerability is the doorway to dependency, so the doorway feels threatening. This often shows up when a partner asks for emotional closeness. The partner might say, "Tell me what you feel," and the dismissive avoidant person feels panic or irritation. The partner may be asking for connection. The avoidant person may hear a demand. They may worry that if they open up, they will be pulled into an emotional process that never ends. They may worry that their words will be used against them later. They may worry that opening up will lead to more expectations. These worries can make vulnerability feel like a trap. The fear of vulnerability is also connected to the fear of being misunderstood. If you grew up in a home where your feelings were dismissed or corrected, you may not trust that someone will understand you now. You may fear that if you share, the other person will respond in a way that makes you feel worse. For example, you might fear that you will be told you are overreacting, or that your feeling is wrong, or that you are being selfish. Even if your partner has never done that, the fear can still exist because the body remembers the old experience. To avoid being misunderstood, the avoidant person may choose silence. One common situation looks like this. A partner asks, "Do you miss me?" And the dismissive avoidant person feels an instant tightening. They might answer vaguely or change the subject. They might even respond with annoyance. The partner may feel rejected. The avoidant person may feel relief after the subject changes, because relief comes from avoiding vulnerability. Underneath, saying "I miss you" is not just a sentence. It is an admission of need. It is an admission that the partner matters. If being attached has felt risky in the past, that admission can feel frightening. Vulnerability is also hard when you have practiced emotional self-control for a long time. Many dismissive avoidant people have become skilled at turning down their feelings. They have learned to focus on tasks, logic, and independence. When they finally allow themselves to feel, the emotion can come in strong. That can make vulnerability feel overwhelming. They may fear that if they open the door even a little, the feelings will rush out and they will not be able to manage them. So they keep the door shut, not because they do not want closeness, but because they fear losing control. This can create a strange cycle. The avoidant person keeps feelings contained for a long time, then becomes numb or irritable. The relationship begins to feel flat. The partner may press for connection. The avoidant person feels more pressure and withdraws. The withdrawal increases loneliness for both people. The avoidant person might then end the relationship, telling themselves they are not suited for intimacy. In reality, the relationship may have been strained by fear of vulnerability, not by lack of love. The fear of vulnerability can also show up as perfectionism. Some dismissive, avoidant people believe they must be certain before they speak. They fear saying the wrong thing. They fear being judged for not having the perfect emotional response. In a sense, they treat vulnerability as an exam. If you do not have the right answer, you should not answer at all. This is a painful standard because relationships do not require perfect words. They require presence. Still, if you grew up with criticism or high expectations, the fear of being wrong can make it hard to speak from the heart. Healing the fear of vulnerability does not mean forcing yourself into deep emotional disclosure. For many avoidant people, that approach backfires. Healing often begins with small, manageable honesty. You might share a preference. You might admit you are tired. You might say you felt stressed during a conversation. You might tell your partner you care even if you are struggling to show it. These are small openings. They build trust because they show that you can be seen and still be safe. One common situation looks like this in growth. A dismissive avoidant person feels the urge to withdraw after a conflict and instead says, "I need time to calm down, but I want to come back and talk." This is vulnerability. It admits that emotions are present. It admits that the relationship matters. It also protects the person's need for space. This kind of statement can change the whole emotional climate of a relationship because it creates both autonomy and connection. It also helps to remember that vulnerability can be paired with boundaries. Many avoidant people fear vulnerability because they fear being swallowed. Boundaries protect against being swallowed. You can share what you feel and still say what you can and cannot do. You can admit you are hurt and still ask for time. You can say you need reassurance and still respect your partner's needs. Vulnerability does not require losing yourself. In fact, the healthiest vulnerability often includes a clear sense of self. The fear of vulnerability makes sense when you see it as a learned protection. If you learned that vulnerability leads to shame, neglect, or obligation, you would fear it too. The goal is not to judge the fear. The goal is to understand it and gently update it. As you experience safe responses to small disclosures, your body can begin to relax. Vulnerability can begin to feel less like danger and more like intimacy. Over time, the door that once felt terrifying to open can become a doorway to the kind of love you may have wanted all along, a love where you are strong and still allowed to be soft. Shame and its hidden role. This section is about shame and its hidden role in dismissive avoidant attachment. Shame is one of the most misunderstood emotions because it often hides behind other feelings. It can look like irritation, sarcasm, or indifference. It can look like a sudden urge to withdraw, a sudden urge to change the subject, or a sudden urge to end a relationship. Shame is the feeling that something about you is unacceptable, and that if it is seen, you will be judged or rejected. For many dismissive avoidant people, shame is not felt as a loud inner voice. It is felt as a quiet tightening that says, "Do not let anyone see this." Shame often forms early when a child's normal needs are treated as inconvenient. A child who cries is not doing something wrong. A child who wants comfort is not being dramatic. A child who wants attention is not being selfish. Still, in some homes, those ordinary needs are met with irritation, ridicule, or dismissal. When that happens repeatedly, the child begins to associate their own vulnerability with disapproval. Over time, the child learns to feel ashamed of having needs at all. The safest solution becomes hiding the need. This is one reason dismissive avoidant people often look calm and self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency can be a strength, but it can also be a way to avoid shame. If you never ask for comfort, you never risk being told you are too much. If you never admit you are hurt, you never risk being told you are weak. If you never show longing, you never risk being laughed at. The avoidant person learns, often without realizing it, that distance is a way to stay dignified. The dignity is real and it is also protective. One common situation looks like this. A dismissive, avoidant person feels lonely in a relationship but cannot bring themselves to say it. Saying it would reveal need, and need can activate shame. Instead, they might become critical. They might say their partner is too emotional, too demanding, or too intense. They might focus on flaws. This criticism creates distance, and distance reduces the risk of being seen. Underneath, the person may be longing for closeness, but shame blocks the direct path, so the person takes an indirect path that looks like withdrawal. Shame can also form in families where emotions are mocked. A child who cries might be teased. A child who is sensitive might be called weak. A child who is affectionate might be told they are clingy. Even if these comments are framed as jokes, a child takes them seriously because the child depends on the caregiver's acceptance. The child learns to harden. They learn to hide tenderness. As an adult, they may feel a flush of shame when they get emotional, and they may shut it down instantly. They might not even know why they are shutting it down. They simply feel that it is unsafe to show. For dismissive avoidance, shame often hides behind indifference. Indifference can be a shield that protects against the risk of wanting. If you admit you want someone, you might be rejected. If you pretend you do not care, you cannot be rejected in the same way. This is not always conscious. The person might genuinely convince themselves that the relationship is not that important. They might tell themselves they are better off alone. These thoughts can be a way of reducing the pain of vulnerability. Shame says, if you need, you are weak. Indifference says, I do not need. Shame also shows up in the fear of being emotionally incompetent. Many dismissive, avoidant adults feel confident in practical areas of life, and then feel strangely inadequate in emotional areas. They may not know what to say when someone is upset. They may not know how to comfort. They may not know how to talk about feelings without feeling awkward. When their partner asks for emotional presence, the avoidant person may feel a wave of shame that says, I cannot do this. Instead of admitting that shame, they may withdraw or become defensive, because defensiveness is easier to tolerate than inadequacy. One common situation looks like this. A partner says, I need you to be there for me emotionally, and the avoidant person feels their stomach drop. They may respond with frustration, saying they are doing their best, or that the partner is never satisfied. The partner may feel dismissed. Underneath, the avoidant person may feel ashamed that they do not know how to meet the request. Shame creates a sense of being trapped. If you cannot do what is asked and you cannot admit you are struggling, withdrawal becomes the escape. Shame can also be connected to the belief that feelings are weakness. Many dismissive, avoidant people were raised in environments that valued toughness. They learned to respect self-control. They learned to admire people who do not fall apart. In that world, emotions become associated with losing control. If emotions mean losing control and losing control means being judged, then shame becomes the guardian at the gate. Shame steps in and says, do not go there. The person then becomes numb or distant, not because they lack feeling, but because shame is protecting them from exposure. This often affects how dismissive avoidants handle love itself. Love is vulnerable. If you love someone, they matter. If they matter, they can hurt you. If you admit how much they matter, you are giving them access to your softer places. Shame can make that admission feel humiliating, especially if you were taught that you should not need anyone. So the avoidant person may keep love behind a wall. They may show love through actions but struggle with words. They may be loyal but struggle with openness. They may want closeness, but retreat when closeness is offered. Shame is also why many dismissive avoidants have trouble apologizing. Apology requires admitting you caused hurt. For someone with a strong shame response, that admission can feel unbearable. It can feel like confirming that you were bad. Instead of apologizing, the person might argue, minimize, or withdraw. They might tell themselves the issue is not important. The partner may feel invalidated. The avoidant person may feel safer. Underneath, shame is running the show. If you can see shame, you can begin to change the pattern. Healing shame begins with recognizing that shame is not the truth. It is a feeling with a history. If you were shamed for needing, you may still carry the belief that need is unacceptable. In reality, need is human. Everyone needs comfort sometimes. Everyone needs reassurance sometimes. Everyone wants to be seen. When you begin to accept that, shame loses some of its power. You can start to treat your own vulnerability with respect rather than contempt. This healing often requires self-compassion, but not the kind that feels like empty positive talk. It is more like a steady inner stance that says, of course this is hard for me. If you have spent your whole life avoiding emotional exposure, it makes sense that exposure feels scary. If you were not taught emotional language, it makes sense that you struggle to find words. Shame tries to make you believe that struggle means you are defective. Self-compassion reminds you that struggle means you are human and learning. One common situation looks like this in growth. A dismissive, avoidant person notices the urge to withdraw and instead says, I feel embarrassed talking about this, but I want to try. This sentence is powerful because it names shame without being controlled by it. It allows the partner to understand what is happening. It also turns the conversation from a fight into a shared moment. Shame thrives in silence. When shame is named gently, it often softens. It also helps to understand that partners can unintentionally trigger shame. A partner who presses for vulnerability, uses criticism, or expresses frustration can intensify an avoidant person's shame, even if the partner's needs are valid. This is why the path forward often includes learning to communicate without shaming each other. Avoidant people often need invitations rather than demands. Anxious partners often need reassurance rather than distance. When both people can see shame as part of the dynamic, it becomes easier to create safety. Shame has a hidden role in dismissive avoidant attachment because it makes vulnerability feel dangerous. It pushes the person toward control, independence, and emotional distance. It can make love feel risky because love requires being seen. Understanding shame does not mean you become fragile. It means you become honest about what drives your patterns. When you can see shame, you can stop obeying it. You can begin to practice vulnerability in small ways that preserve dignity and build connection. Over time, the old shame story can be replaced by a new one. A story where you are allowed to be strong and still allowed to need, and where being human is not something to hide. How anger and withdrawal serve as shields. This section is about how anger and withdrawal serve as shields, especially for someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style. Many dismissive avoidant people do not think of themselves as afraid. They often think of themselves as calm, practical, and steady. Still, when closeness begins to feel emotionally risky, a protective response can turn on quickly. For many avoidant people, that protection takes the form of anger or withdrawal. These responses can look harsh from the outside, and they can feel confusing from the inside. Understanding them as shields does not excuse hurtful behavior, but it does explain why these reactions are so common and why they can feel so automatic. Anger is a shield because it creates distance. When you feel angry, you often feel more powerful. You feel less vulnerable. Anger can make you feel certain, even when you are actually scared or hurt underneath. For a dismissive, avoidant person, anger can be especially useful because it replaces softer emotions that feel unsafe. If sadness feels humiliating, anger can feel dignified. If fear feels weak, anger can feel strong. The person may not consciously choose anger. Anger may simply arrive because it is the emotion that feels tolerable. Withdrawal is also a shield because it reduces exposure. If vulnerability feels dangerous, disappearing emotionally can feel like safety. Withdrawal can be physical, like leaving the room, going for a drive, or staying busy. It can also be emotional, like becoming quiet, giving short answers, and avoiding eye contact. Withdrawal can create immediate relief for the avoidant person because it restores control. It lowers the emotional intensity. It reduces the risk of saying something that reveals need. The problem is that it often increases pain for the partner, who experiences withdrawal as abandonment or rejection. One common situation looks like this. A partner brings up a problem and wants to talk. The dismissive avoidant person feels a surge of pressure. They might not be able to name what they feel, but they notice tension in their body and a desire to escape. They might respond with anger, saying the partner is overreacting or starting drama, or they might withdraw, becoming quiet and distant. The partner feels hurt. The avoidant person feels relief. Underneath, the shield is doing its job, which is to reduce vulnerability. Anger and withdrawal often serve the same purpose, but they do it in different ways. Anger pushes the other person away by making the interaction unpleasant. Withdrawal pushes the other person away by making the interaction impossible. Both keep the avoidant person from having to stay present with feelings that feel too exposed. Both can prevent a deeper conversation that might lead to intimacy. In the moment, that prevention can feel like safety. Over time, it creates disconnection. Anger can also be a shield against shame. If you feel ashamed, you may feel small. Anger can make you feel bigger. If you grew up in an environment where vulnerability was mocked or criticized, shame can be a powerful trigger. A partner's request for closeness can activate shame, even if the partner is gentle. The avoidant person might suddenly feel as if they are failing, as if they are being asked to do something they cannot do. Instead of admitting that, anger may rise. Anger says, "The problem is you," which protects the person from feeling, "The problem is me." It protects dignity, even as it damages connection. Withdrawal can be a shield against feeling trapped. Many dismissive avoidant people have a strong sensitivity to obligation. They may fear that emotional conversations will lead to demands they cannot meet. They may fear that once they start talking, they will not be allowed to stop. If they grew up in a home where emotional exchanges felt controlling, withdrawal becomes a way to protect autonomy. They leave the conversation to regain a sense of freedom. The partner may interpret this as avoidance. The avoidant person experiences it as survival. One common situation looks like this after intimacy. A couple has a deeply connected moment, perhaps a heartfelt conversation or a night of closeness. The next day, the dismissive avoidant person becomes distant. They might feel irritated by small things. They might pick a fight. They might withdraw into work. This can be confusing for the partner because intimacy usually brings people closer, not farther. For the avoidant person, intimacy can activate fear of being needed. Anger or withdrawal then arrives to restore distance. The shield quiets the fear by creating space. It is important to understand that anger and withdrawal can be learned early. In some families, anger is the only emotion that is allowed. Sadness is mocked. Fear is dismissed. Need is shamed. Anger, however, might be respected because it looks like strength. A child in that family learns to translate softer feelings into anger. In other families, withdrawal is rewarded. The child learns that staying quiet avoids conflict. They learn that disappearing emotionally keeps the peace. Later, those childhood strategies show up in adult relationships, especially when the person feels emotionally threatened. This often shows up in the way dismissive avoidant adults respond to their partner's pain. A partner might cry, and the avoidant person might feel overwhelmed. They may not know what to do. Their own vulnerability is activated because tears invite closeness, tenderness, and comfort. If those experiences are unfamiliar, the avoidant person may feel trapped. They might respond with anger, saying the partner is being dramatic, or they might withdraw, leaving the room. The partner feels abandoned. The avoidant person feels relief. Underneath, the avoidant person may feel helpless and ashamed. Anger and withdrawal protect them from those feelings. Anger and withdrawal also protect the avoidant person from longing. Longing is a tender feeling that admits you want closeness. For someone who has learned to survive through independence, longing can feel dangerous. It can feel as if it will weaken you. When longing begins to rise, the avoidant person may shut it down through distance, or they may create a conflict that makes closeness feel undesirable. They might focus on flaws. They might tell themselves the relationship is not right. They might become irritable. The shield protects them from the risk of wanting. This does not mean the avoidant person is manipulative. Most of the time, these shields are not conscious strategies. They are automatic protections. The avoidant person may not even know what they are protecting against. They might believe the partner is truly the problem. They might believe the conversation is truly pointless. They might believe the relationship is truly too much. The shield can feel like clarity. The work of healing is learning to recognize when the shield is active, so you can slow down and find what is underneath. One common sign is the speed of the reaction. When anger rises suddenly, it often means something softer was touched. When withdrawal happens instantly, it often means the person felt exposed. Recognizing this does not require blaming yourself. It requires curiosity. You might ask yourself, "What did I just feel a moment ago?" Or, "What felt threatened?" Sometimes the answer is fear of being judged. Sometimes it is fear of being obligated. Sometimes it is fear of losing autonomy. The exact fear can vary, but the pattern is often the same. Healing involves learning alternative ways to create safety. Instead of using anger, you can learn to name overwhelm. Instead of withdrawing completely, you can learn to take a break with connection. A dismissive avoidant person might say, "I am getting flooded. I need 10 minutes, and I want to come back." This protects the person's need for space without abandoning the partner. It also reduces shame, because it frames the problem as emotional overload rather than as the partner being wrong. This kind of communication can feel awkward at first, but it is often deeply relieving for both people. It also involves learning to tolerate small amounts of vulnerability. When you can tolerate vulnerability, you do not need shields as much. You can admit you are hurt without becoming angry. You can admit you are scared without withdrawing. You can admit you need space without making your partner feel rejected. This is not about becoming endlessly emotional. It is about becoming emotionally honest enough to stay connected. Anger and withdrawal serve as shields because they protect the dismissive avoidant person from vulnerability, shame, and the fear of being trapped. They create a sense of control in moments that feel emotionally risky. The cost is that they also create distance and pain in relationships. When you begin to see these reactions as shields, you can begin to handle them with more awareness. You can start to notice the moment the shield rises, slow down, and choose a response that protects you without pushing love away. Over time, the shield can become less necessary because safety can be built in new ways, and closeness can become something you can stay present for rather than something you have to defend yourself against. This section is about the deep craving for closeness that often lives inside a dismissive avoidant person, even when they rarely show it. This can be one of the most painful and confusing parts of dismissive avoidance. From the outside, a dismissive avoidant person can look self-contained and unbothered. They may seem as if they do not need much. They may even say they do not. Still, many carry a quiet longing to be understood, to be chosen, and to feel emotionally held. The craving is real. The difficulty is that the same experiences that created the longing also taught the person to fear it. Closeness is a human need, not a weakness. People are wired to want connection because connection makes life livable. When you share your inner world with someone and they respond with care, something inside you relaxes. You feel less alone. You feel supported in a way that is hard to replicate through achievements or distractions. Even people who value independence can long for that kind of soft landing. The dismissive avoidant person often longs for it too, but the longing can feel dangerous to admit because it implies dependency. Many dismissive avoidant people learned early that closeness was complicated. They may have had caregivers who provided in practical ways but did not offer emotional attunement. They may have learned that feelings created discomfort in adults. They may have learned that needing led to dismissal, ridicule, or irritation. In that environment, the child still craves closeness, but the child also learns to stop reaching for it. The craving does not disappear. It simply moves underground, where it becomes harder to name and harder to satisfy. This often leads to a particular kind of loneliness. It is not always the loneliness of having no people around you. It can be the loneliness of being surrounded and still not feeling known. A dismissive, avoidant adult may have friends, coworkers, and even a partner. They may enjoy company and still feel that there is a private room inside them that nobody enters. They may not talk about this loneliness because talking about it feels like need, and need feels unsafe. So they keep living as if they are fine, while quietly craving something deeper. One common situation looks like this. A dismissive avoidant person is in a relationship where everything seems good on paper. They have stability, companionship, and shared routines. Still, they feel a subtle restlessness. They might say they feel bored. They might say something is missing. They might start focusing on their partner's flaws. The partner may feel confused because nothing obvious is wrong. Underneath, the avoidant person may be craving deeper closeness, but the craving feels unfamiliar and threatening. Instead of moving toward it, they move away from it, because moving away feels safer. The deep craving for closeness often shows up in moments that bypass the person's defenses. For example, the avoidant person might feel unexpectedly moved by a partner's kindness. They might feel softened by a moment of tenderness. They might feel warmth when their partner simply sits with them without asking anything. These moments can feel like relief, like water in a dry place. Then, later, the person may feel embarrassed or unsettled by how much the moment mattered. They might withdraw to regain control. This push and pull can be painful, but it often reflects the conflict between craving and fear. The craving also shows up in the desire to be understood without having to explain. Many dismissive avoidants struggle with emotional language. They may not know how to describe what they feel. They may also fear that if they try, they will be judged or misunderstood. So they long for a partner who can sense what they need without them having to say it. This longing is tender and understandable. The problem is that adult relationships usually require some form of communication. When the avoidant person cannot communicate the need, they may feel disappointed that the partner does not provide it. They may then tell themselves closeness is not worth the trouble, which is another way of protecting against vulnerability. One common situation looks like this. The avoidant person is stressed and wants comfort, but they do not know how to ask. Their partner senses something and asks what is wrong. The avoidant person feels pressure and says nothing. The partner backs off. The avoidant person then feels alone and the craving becomes sharper. Instead of recognizing the pattern, the avoidant person might tell themselves their partner is not supportive. The partner might tell themselves the avoidant person does not want closeness. Both are missing the hidden craving underneath the defensive behavior. Closeness can also be craved in a very specific way. Many dismissive avoidants want closeness that is calm. They want connection that feels like companionship, steadiness, and shared life. They often do not want closeness that feels intense, emotional, or consuming. They may feel overwhelmed by big displays of emotion. They may feel pressured by frequent reassurance requests. This does not mean they want no intimacy. It means they want a kind of intimacy that respects their nervous system and their need for space. When they cannot articulate that, relationships can swing between distance and intensity. The craving can also show up as nostalgia. A dismissive avoidant person might think about an earlier relationship or an early stage of a relationship and feel a longing for how it felt. They might remember a time when closeness felt easy. They might not recognize that early closeness often feels easier because expectations are lower. As the relationship deepens, the avoidant person's fear rises, and they mistake that fear for incompatibility. The craving for closeness remains, but it is tied to a version of closeness that felt safer because it did not require deep vulnerability. Another place the craving shows up is in moments of loss. Dismissive avoidants often seem fine after a breakup, and sometimes they truly feel relief. Still, many experience grief later, when the relationship is no longer there and the defenses relax. They may feel waves of sadness that surprise them. They may miss the person more than they expected. The craving for closeness becomes clearer when the opportunity for closeness is gone, because the fear of closeness is no longer triggered. This can lead to regret, confusion, and a sense that they do not understand their own heart. The deep craving for closeness is also why dismissive avoidants can sometimes become suddenly very affectionate. They might have moments where they want to be close, where they feel tender, where they initiate intimacy. Their partner may feel hopeful. Then, when closeness increases, the avoidant person may retreat. This can create the painful experience for the partner of being pulled in and pushed away. For the avoidant person, it can create shame because they do not want to hurt anyone. The craving is real, and the fear is real, and the person feels caught between them. Healing involves honoring the craving without obeying the fear. This begins with admitting to yourself that you want closeness. Many dismissive avoidants have trained themselves not to want it, because wanting feels risky. When you can gently admit the longing, you can begin to look at what kind of closeness actually feels safe for you. You can start to recognize that you do not have to choose between independence and intimacy. You can create a relationship where space is respected and closeness is steady, not overwhelming. One common situation looks like this in growth. A dismissive avoidant person notices that they feel closer when they have time to transition into intimacy. They share this with their partner. They explain that sudden emotional demands make them shut down, but calm connection helps them open. The partner feels less rejected because they understand what the avoidant person needs. The avoidant person feels less trapped because they are not being forced. This is how the craving for closeness can be met without triggering as much fear. The deep craving for closeness is not evidence that you are inconsistent or manipulative. It is evidence that you are human. You learn to protect yourself by creating distance, but you did not stop needing connection. The craving is the part of you that still believes love can be good. When you learn to approach that craving with respect, you can begin to build relationships that honor both your need for autonomy and your need for closeness. The goal is not to become a different person. The goal is to become more whole, so closeness is no longer a threat, but a steady place you can return to. How denial works to cover fear. This section is about how denial works to cover fear, especially in dismissive avoidant attachment. Denial is often misunderstood as lying, stubbornness, or a refusal to face reality. In many dismissive avoidant people, denial is not a dramatic choice. It is a quiet survival move that helps them stay steady when something feels emotionally risky. Denial can sound like, "It is not a big deal," or "I do not care," or "I am fine." These phrases may even feel true in the moment, because denial can temporarily reduce fear by pushing it out of awareness. The problem is that what is pushed away still exists, and it often returns later in the form of distance, irritation, or sudden relationship decisions. Denial often begins in childhood when a child learns that fear does not have a safe place to go. If a child expresses fear and is mocked or dismissed, the child learns that fear creates discomfort in others. If the child expresses fear and no one helps, the child learns that fear is a lonely experience. In either case, fear becomes something to hide. Over time, the child may learn to deny fear even to themselves. They become someone who is not afraid. That identity can feel powerful. It can also make intimacy difficult, because intimacy asks you to admit what matters, and what matters is often tied to fear. For dismissive avoidance, denial often shows up as minimizing. Minimizing is a form of denial where the person reduces the importance of a feeling or event. They might say a conflict does not matter. They might say a partner is overreacting. They might say their own hurt is not worth talking about. Minimizing can be comforting in the short term because it lowers emotional intensity. If you tell yourself something does not matter, you do not have to deal with the fear that it matters a lot. The fear might be that you could be rejected, that you could be abandoned, or that you could be controlled. Denial keeps those fears at bay. One common situation looks like this. A partner says, "I feel distant from you," and the dismissive avoidant person responds, "Everything is fine." The avoidant person might truly want everything to be fine. They might also feel fear that the conversation will turn into a demand for vulnerability. Denial helps them avoid that fear. The partner may feel invalidated and press harder. The avoidant person then feels more pressure and may withdraw. The denial did not solve the problem. It simply postponed it while increasing distance. Denial also works by shifting attention to something else. A dismissive avoidant person might focus on work, errands, exercise, or hobbies when a relationship feels emotionally intense. Productivity becomes a way to avoid fear. If you are busy, you do not have to feel. If you are solving problems, you do not have to face vulnerability. This can be praised by society. People admire hard-working, focused individuals. The avoidant person can feel proud of being productive. Underneath, the productivity may be covering fear, especially fear of needing someone and not knowing how to ask for care. Denial can also take the form of detachment. Detachment is the feeling of stepping back emotionally and observing, rather than participating. A dismissive avoidant person might talk about their relationship as if they are analyzing it, rather than feeling it. They might focus on logic. They might list reasons why something will not work. They might convince themselves the other person is wrong for them. This detachment can be a form of denial because it keeps the person away from the vulnerable truth, which is often that they care and they are scared. One common situation looks like this after a deepening of commitment. The couple talks about moving in together or taking the next step, and the dismissive, avoidant person suddenly becomes critical. They might say the relationship has problems. They might focus on incompatibilities. They might feel restless and want to escape. These thoughts can feel like clarity. They might not recognize that fear is underneath. The fear might be of being trapped, of losing autonomy, or of being relied on emotionally. Denial then transforms fear into judgment. It says, "The problem is the relationship," which is easier to tolerate than "the problem is that I am scared." Denial can also protect against shame. Many dismissive avoidants carry shame about needing. If they admit they are scared of closeness, they may feel weak. If they admit they are lonely, they may feel exposed. Denial keeps them from feeling that shame. They might tell themselves they do not need closeness. They might tell themselves they are better alone. They might tell themselves relationships are not worth it. These statements can reduce shame in the short term. The long-term cost is isolation and the repeated loss of relationships that might have been meaningful. Denial also affects how dismissive avoidants respond to their partner's feelings. If a partner expresses sadness or fear, the dismissive avoidant person might deny the importance of the feeling. They might say it is not a big deal. They might tell the partner to be strong. They might try to change the subject. This can be painful for the partner. From the avoidant person's side, the partner's feelings can activate fear. The fear might be that the partner's emotion will demand something from them, or that the emotion will escalate. Denial is an attempt to reduce fear by reducing emotion. This often creates a repeating cycle. The partner feels unseen and becomes more emotional. The avoidant person feels more overwhelmed and denies more strongly. The partner then feels rejected and may become angry or desperate. The avoidant person withdraws. Both people are trying to find safety. Denial is the avoidant person's safety strategy, but it can create the opposite of safety in the relationship. It can make the partner feel alone, which increases the intensity that the avoidant person is trying to avoid. Denial can also delay grief. Many dismissive avoidants do not grieve losses right away. They may feel relief after a breakup because the pressure of closeness is gone. They may tell themselves they are fine. They may throw themselves into work or new activities. Later, when life is quieter, grief can rise unexpectedly. The person may feel sadness they cannot explain. They may miss the person more than they expected. Denial kept grief away until it could no longer be held down. This is one reason avoidant people can seem to move on quickly and then struggle later in private. Healing begins with recognizing denial as a protective move rather than as truth. That recognition can be difficult because denial often feels like clarity. It feels like certainty. It feels like a solid conclusion. The first step is simply to notice when you feel the urge to minimize, detach, or insist you do not care. You might ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? The question is not meant to interrogate you. It is meant to gently bring fear into awareness so it does not have to hide behind denial. One common situation looks like this in growth. A dismissive avoidant person notices the thought, "This is not a big deal," and pauses. They recognize that the thought often appears when they feel vulnerable. They take a breath and admit to themselves that it does matter. They might not share everything at once. They might simply allow the feeling to exist. This is a quiet act of courage. It is the beginning of changing the pattern because once you admit something matters, you can decide what to do with it instead of automatically withdrawing. Another part of healing is learning to tolerate fear without turning it into distance. Fear is not a sign that the relationship is wrong. Fear is often a sign that the relationship is important. When you care, you have something to lose. Dismissive avoidant people often deny fear because they want to be invulnerable. The goal is not to become fragile. The goal is to become honest. Honest fear can be communicated gently. It can be paired with boundaries. It can be held without panic. When fear is allowed into the room, denial becomes less necessary. How denial works to cover fear is a story about protection. Denial helps the dismissive avoidant person keep control, avoid shame, and reduce emotional intensity. It makes life feel manageable in the short term. The cost is that it blocks intimacy and delays emotional processing. When you learn to see denial as a shield, you can begin to set it down at the right moments. You can begin to name fear without being overwhelmed by it. Over time, this change allows you to stay connected during difficult moments, and it allows closeness to feel less like danger and more like comfort. Emotional numbness versus emotional control. This section is about the difference between emotional numbness and emotional control, and why that difference matters so much for dismissive avoidant attachment. Many dismissive avoidant people are described as controlled, steady, or calm. Sometimes that description is accurate in a healthy way. Emotional control can be a strength, especially when it means you can feel something and still choose how you act. Emotional numbness is different. Numbness is not choosing a response. Numbness is losing access to the feeling itself, or experiencing it only as a distant, muted signal. The two can look similar from the outside, but they lead to very different lives on the inside. Emotional control means you are connected to your feelings even when you are not ruled by them. You might feel sad and still go to work. You might feel angry and still speak respectfully. You might feel afraid and still take a step forward. The feelings are present, but you have room around them. Emotional control usually develops when a person has learned that feelings can be tolerated and soothed. They learn that emotions rise and fall, and that connection can help them settle. This kind of control is flexible. It does not require shutting down. Emotional numbness, on the other hand, is often a response to feelings that once felt too painful or too unsafe. Numbness is a kind of internal dimming. It can feel like being behind glass, watching life rather than fully living it. A person might know intellectually that something is sad or important, yet they do not feel much in their body. Or they might feel irritation and tension without being able to identify the softer emotion underneath. Numbness can protect you from overwhelm, and it can also cut you off from joy, intimacy, and self-understanding. For dismissive avoidance, numbness often begins early. If a child repeatedly experiences that emotions are not met with comfort, emotions can start to feel pointless. If sadness does not bring soothing, sadness becomes an unbearable loneliness. If fear does not bring reassurance, fear becomes something you have to swallow. If anger creates conflict that is not repaired, anger becomes dangerous. In that environment, the child's safest move can be to stop feeling as much as possible. The child learns to function without emotional support by turning feelings down. This often happens quietly. The child does not decide, "I will become numb." The child simply learns that showing feeling does not help. They learn to distract themselves. They learn to focus on tasks. They learn to become self-sufficient. Over time, the habit of not feeling becomes automatic. As an adult, the person may believe they are just not emotional. They may say they are fine, they may mean it. The numbness can be so familiar that it feels like the natural state of being. One common situation looks like this. A dismissive avoidant person goes through something objectively painful, such as a breakup or a loss, and they feel strangely calm. They keep functioning. They may even feel relief. People might admire them for being strong. Weeks or months later, the person might suddenly feel restless, irritable, or empty. They might have trouble sleeping. They might feel disconnected from life. The grief was not gone. It was delayed. Numbness held it down until it could not be held anymore. Emotional control is often praised, which can make numbness harder to spot. A dismissive avoidant person may be rewarded for being the calm one in the room. They may be praised for not being dramatic. They may become the person who keeps everything together. This praise can reinforce numbness because it treats emotional absence as maturity. The person may then fear that if they start feeling more, they will lose their identity. They may worry they will become overwhelmed or needy. In reality, feeling more does not mean losing control. It often means becoming more alive. Numbness also affects relationships in a specific way. Intimacy requires emotional presence. A partner wants to feel that you are with them, not only physically, but emotionally. When someone is numb, they may be present in the room but absent in the bond. They might listen and respond with logic, but without the warmth that communicates emotional engagement. The partner may feel lonely. The numb person may feel confused because they are trying. They might not understand what is missing. The missing piece is often emotional resonance, and resonance is hard to offer if you cannot feel what is happening inside you. One common situation looks like this. A partner shares sadness and hopes for comfort. The dismissive avoidant person responds with advice, practical help, or a suggestion to move on. The partner feels unseen. The avoidant person feels frustrated because they offered what they know how to offer. Underneath, numbness may be limiting the avoidant person's access to empathy in the moment. They might care deeply, but they might not feel the partner's emotion in a way that guides a comforting response. This is not a lack of character. It is often a lack of emotional practice. The difference between numbness and control also matters for the avoidant person's inner life. Emotional control allows you to know yourself. You can recognize your needs and make choices. Numbness can make it hard to know what you want, what you need, and what you value. If you cannot feel your own emotions clearly, decisions can become confusing. You might stay in a relationship that does not fit because you cannot feel the dissatisfaction. You might leave a relationship impulsively because numbness suddenly breaks into irritation. You might chase stimulation through work, sex, or distraction because numbness feels flat. Without emotional connection to yourself, you can lose a sense of direction. Numbness can also be mistaken for peace. Some dismissive avoidant adults believe that being calm means they are emotionally healthy. Calm can be healthy. Still, peace has a different quality than numbness. Peace feels settled and warm. Numbness feels blank and distant. Peace allows closeness. Numbness often avoids it. If you notice that you feel calm only when you are alone, and tense when someone wants closeness, that might not be peace. It might be numbness protecting you from vulnerability. One common situation looks like this after a deep conversation. A partner shares something tender and wants you to share too. You may feel blank. You may not know what to say. You may feel irritated that the conversation is continuing. You might want to end it quickly. This can be a sign that numbness has stepped in to protect you from the exposure of vulnerability. Emotional control would allow you to feel discomfort and still stay present. Numbness often shuts the door entirely. Healing involves building the ability to feel without being overwhelmed. For dismissive avoidant people, this can be scary because they associate feeling with chaos. The goal is not to become flooded by emotion. The goal is to become more connected to the smaller feelings that appear before things become intense. When you can notice small signals, you can respond earlier. You can ask for space before you shut down. You can ask for comfort before you become irritable. You can express a boundary before resentment builds. This often starts with the body. Many numb people notice physical sensations before they notice emotions. You might notice tight shoulders, a heavy chest, or restlessness. Those sensations can be the doorway back to feeling. You can learn to pause and ask what the sensation might be connected to. You can also learn to stay with a feeling for a short time without fixing it, analyzing it, or pushing it away. This is a gentle practice. It teaches your system that feeling is survivable. It also helps to practice emotional control in relationships through small disclosures. You might tell a partner you feel overwhelmed. You might admit you feel uncertain. You might say you need time and also say you care. These small truths keep you connected while still protecting your autonomy. Over time, they build trust. They also build your own confidence that you can feel and speak without collapsing or being humiliated. Emotional numbness versus emotional control is an important distinction because numbness often masquerades as strength. Numbness can protect you from pain, but it also protects you from love. Control, in the healthiest sense, allows you to stay present with emotion and still choose your actions. Many dismissive avoidant people are capable of developing this kind of control, especially when they approach themselves with patience. You do not have to choose between being steady and being alive. You can learn to be both. When you do, emotions stop feeling like a threat, and they become what they were always meant to be, which is information that helps you connect, understand, and live more fully. The quiet cost of living defended. This section is about the quiet cost of living defended, which is a gentle way of describing what happens when you spend years protecting yourself from vulnerability. Dismissive avoidant attachment is often built around defense, not in the sense of aggression, but in the sense of guarding your inner world. You learn to stay in control. You learn to rely on yourself. You learn to keep feelings contained. These moves can help you function, and they can also create losses that are easy to ignore until they become too heavy. The cost is quiet because you can still build a life, still succeed, and still appear fine, while something inside you slowly grows tired of being alone. Living defended often starts as relief. When you pull back from a conversation that feels too emotional, you feel calmer. When you keep your needs private, you avoid disappointment. When you stay independent, you avoid the risk of being controlled. These are real benefits, and they are not imaginary. The problem is that relief is not the same as fulfillment. Relief is the absence of immediate discomfort. Fulfillment is the presence of emotional nourishment. Many dismissive avoidant people are skilled at relief and deprived of fulfillment, and that imbalance can shape the whole tone of their life. One cost is loneliness that does not look like loneliness. Many dismissive avoidant adults would never describe themselves as lonely. They may have friends, dates, family, and colleagues. They may be socially active. Still, loneliness can exist even in a full calendar. It is the feeling that nobody truly knows you, and that you do not truly let anyone know you. You may share stories and opinions while keeping your tender feelings hidden. You may be liked and respected while still feeling unseen. This is the loneliness of emotional distance, and it can be hard to name because it is woven into what feels normal. Another cost is the erosion of intimacy over time. Intimacy is not only about sex or romance. It is the feeling of being emotionally close, the feeling that you can be honest and still be safe. When you live defended, intimacy can feel risky, so you keep relationships in a safer zone. You might enjoy companionship and shared activities while avoiding deeper emotional engagement. In the beginning, this can feel fine. Over time, many people begin to feel that something is missing. The relationship may feel functional but not nourishing. The avoidant person may feel bored or restless, and they may not realize that the restlessness is grief for the closeness they have not allowed. One common situation looks like this. A dismissive avoidant person is in a long-term relationship, and everything appears stable. There is no dramatic conflict. Still, the partner begins to say they feel lonely, and the avoidant person feels irritated. They might think the partner is never satisfied. They might think the partner is too emotional. Underneath, the avoidant person may be protecting themselves from the shame of feeling inadequate. They may also be protecting themselves from the vulnerability of admitting they want closeness too. Living defended turns closeness into a problem, so the avoidant person stays in irritation rather than stepping into tenderness. A quiet cost is the loss of emotional range. When you spend years turning down feelings, you do not only turn down pain. You often turn down joy as well. Life can begin to feel flat. You may enjoy things, but the enjoyment may be muted. You may feel proud of achievements, but the pride may not reach your heart. You may feel affection, but the affection may not be expressed. The defended life can become efficient, orderly, and emotionally thin. Some people describe this as numbness. Others describe it as being fine. Either way, the cost is that you are not fully experiencing your own life. Another cost is the strain of constant self-management. Living defended requires effort. You have to monitor what you share. You have to stay composed. You have to keep your needs contained. You have to manage other people's expectations so you do not feel trapped. This effort can be invisible even to you because it has been happening for so long. Still, it can lead to fatigue. It can make relationships feel draining because relationships require emotional presence, and emotional presence feels like work when you are defended. The avoidant person might then avoid relationships not because they do not want love, but because love feels exhausting. One common situation looks like this. A partner wants to talk after a conflict, and the dismissive avoidant person feels instantly tired. They might say they do not have the energy. They might prefer to move on. The tiredness can be real. It can also be the tiredness of defense. When you have spent years protecting yourself from emotion, emotional conversations feel like heavy lifting. The avoidant person may not realize that the heaviness comes partly from not having practice. The more you avoid emotional engagement, the heavier it feels when it arrives. The defended life also affects repair. Repair is the ability to return after hurt, to apologize, to listen, and to reconnect. Dismissive avoidant people often struggle with repair because repair requires vulnerability. It requires admitting you care about the relationship enough to address pain. It requires admitting you may have contributed to the hurt. If shame is strong, repair can feel humiliating. If control is strong, repair can feel like surrender. So the avoidant person may avoid repair by withdrawing, minimizing, or acting as if nothing happened. The partner may carry the hurt alone. Over time, the relationship accumulates unspoken pain, and that pain creates distance. Another cost is the way living defended can shape your sense of self. If you only show the competent, composed version of yourself, you may start to believe that version is all you are allowed to be. You may lose contact with your softer parts. You may not know what you want beyond achievement. You may not know what makes you feel deeply connected. You may not know what kind of love you truly desire. The defended life can become a narrow life, not because you lack depth, but because you have not allowed yourself to live from your depth. This can also affect creativity and play. Play requires looseness. Creativity requires risk. Both require letting yourself be imperfect. If you are defended, imperfection can feel unsafe. You may prefer to do things you are already good at. You may avoid hobbies that make you feel exposed. You may judge yourself harshly for not being excellent. This can shrink your world. You can still be productive, but you may feel that something is missing, a sense of aliveness that comes from being free. The defended life can also create misunderstanding with loved ones. Partners and friends may interpret your distance as lack of care. They may believe you do not value the relationship. They may feel rejected. You may feel misunderstood because you might care deeply. You may feel that your loyalty, your presence, and your practical support should be enough. The problem is that emotional distance blocks the signals that help other people feel loved. This mismatch can create conflict that feels unfair to both sides. The partner feels deprived. The avoidant person feels judged. Both feel alone. One common situation looks like this. A partner says, "I want to feel closer," and the avoidant person hears, "You are failing." The avoidant person then withdraws. The partner hears the withdrawal as, "You do not matter." Both interpretations intensify pain. Living defended makes it harder to translate needs into connection, because defense turns every request into a threat. When you begin to lower defense, requests can become invitations instead. The quiet cost also includes missed moments of comfort. Comfort is not only something you receive when you are falling apart. It is also the everyday experience of being held emotionally in small ways. It is sitting with someone after a long day and feeling understood without having to explain everything. It is being able to say you are tired and hearing kindness in response. When you live defended, you miss those moments because you do not let them in. You may not ask. You may not receive. You may not believe comfort is available. You might not even know you are missing it until you experience it and realize how good it feels. Healing does not mean throwing all defenses away. Defenses formed for a reason. They protected you. The goal is to make them flexible. You can learn to notice when defense is helpful, such as setting a boundary in an unhealthy relationship. You can also learn to notice when defense is costing you intimacy in a healthy relationship. Flexibility is what creates freedom. When you can choose whether to open or close, you are no longer living automatically. One common step toward healing is learning to stay present a little longer. When you feel the urge to withdraw, you pause and take a breath. You name to yourself that you are feeling overwhelmed. You might share that with your partner in a simple way. You might ask for a short break and commit to returning. These actions protect you while also building trust. They show that you can have space without disappearing. Over time, this reduces the need for heavy defense because the relationship begins to feel safer. The quiet cost of living defended is not meant to scare you. It is meant to honor what you have been carrying. You have likely survived by being strong and self-contained. You may have built a life that looks successful. Still, the heart has needs that success cannot meet. When you begin to soften defense, you do not lose your strength. You gain access to a fuller life. You gain intimacy, comfort, and emotional freedom. The defended life kept you safe when safety was uncertain. Now, with awareness and practice, you can build a kind of safety that includes closeness, and that kind of safety is worth the gentle work it takes.